Hello everyone. I begin by wishing everyone a very liberating and transcendent, emancipating, freeing holiday of Passover. So as is usually the custom in this class, even though I don't like to go by customs, but try to be a little spontaneous and unpredictable, is to talk about something that's relevant and can be personally transformative in our lives. And here we have perhaps the oldest and longest standing ceremony in history, is the Passover Seder. I did a little research and I couldn't find anything that has been longer as a ceremony goes than Passover, which goes back now 3,330 years. Unbroken chain. Every year there was a Passover since the first time the Jews left Egypt. And so on one hand, this is like, the Seder, the Passover Seder, which was what we do, this will be this coming Friday night, and again Saturday night. In Israel, it's only one night. We always announce that we have to shut off the phones, so we shut off the phones. So here you have this like longest standing ceremony, which is rich with tradition and customs. Its structure is both complex and fascinating, as well as the diversity. Different seders you go around the world, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, even within different groups themselves, people have their particular customs passed on generation after generation. And yet the whole thing still remains, on one hand, yes, as I said, fascinating, but on the other hand, also confusing. What lies behind this whole thing? What is the story behind the ceremony, behind this tradition? And in general, Passover, like every holiday, but particularly this one, is perhaps glaring more than others. You see the entire diversity of the spectrum of different levels of faith and different levels of commitment. You know, of people who grew up in communities that grew up with a very strict adherence to the customs and laws of Passover and every iota, and they take it very seriously, and it's very intense to the point that it can be surprising to those that are not in the fold. And that's one end of this. You have other people who are not quite that intense. It's more of a nostalgic holiday, a nostalgic evening. You get together with family and friends and remember events that happened in the past. Then you have people, the other end of the spectrum. The whole thing is it's not a nuisance, it's an imposition, and they see the whole thing as ridiculous and as basically a joke. But they'll do it because either family, their parents, they don't want to break the hearts of their grandparents. You keep the tradition going. But all the details of whether you're eating the matzah or eating the bitter herbs, the myrrh, and we're drinking the wine, is completely irrelevant and even appears sometimes hollow and mechanical. And for the rest of people, many people gravitate from one extreme to the next. So you have this holiday that literally everybody has a different type of experience. But you don't find too many people that say, this was a transformative experience. Like, people will say if they go to a musical event, a musical concert, or they take I don't want to be sacrilegious, but if they go on an acid trip, they'll say it was transformative. And very few people are going to say those words when it comes to a Seder. Even the most devout. They'll say we did it, traditional and so on. And on the other hand, we call Passover this time of freedom. What is freedom? So freedom, of course, on a very basic level, freedom is that we're not slaves anymore. But is freedom just the absence of slavery? It would be like saying love is just the absence of hate. And is peace just the absence of war? Does it have any deeper meaning than just being the absence of the opposite? So yes, we live in a free world today. They call democracy free. So most people define free as being, you're not in shackles, you're not being held hostage or in bondage, and you're not being imposed upon by another group or another, by your masters. People live in slavery, literal slavery. They were completely not in control of themselves. So freedom would be that you're not subjugated to any other individual or any other nation. But again, is that all that freedom is? I know many people today are free in that sense. They can do whatever they like, but they're very unfree because they are trapped in their own fears and insecurities, and psychologically they're not free at all. So freedom, when you think about it, is not just whether you have chains that hold you down. It also comes down to what your inner psyche and your own spirit is like. If you don't have, your spirit is not free. You can be a free person walking the streets and roaming the streets, but you can be completely enslaved by your fears and your inhibitions and other insecurities that define us. I mean, the therapy business wouldn't be a $1 trillion business if people were all felt free and did not need any insistence in that regard. And yet here comes Passover, considered to be the holiday of freedom, festival of freedom, the time of Zman Cheresenu in Hebrew, the time of our freedom. And can anyone say, you know what, I entered Passover, I felt either physically enslaved or psychologically enslaved, and here the holiday and the Seder freed me. Or I found tools that can help free me. Very few people, I don't know if any people will ever say that. So, that's what I want to address. And it's always good to begin with a provocative question. And being that many people have asked me and asked us, Meaningful Life Center, to present, a lot of people will be hosting Passover Seder, so we call this How to Host Your First Seder. And of course, not just hosted in what, I'm not going to discuss menus and the etiquette and the physical way to prepare a table. That you can figure out, I'm sure, other ways. It's not my expertise. I rely on others for that. But I will try to share how we can prepare people to have a truly meaningful and memorable experience. Now remember, like any experience, it's two things are necessary. The more you prepare, meaning the more you know what you're going to say and how you're going to host and lead something, the more meaningful it will be. And secondly, we have to also remember a Seder, an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour Seder is not going to change lives just because of 2 hours. But you can embed and plant seeds into people's minds where they have the tools that can be sustainable, that even after Passover and after the Seder, they will remember what was said. And that's really how you help people grow. It's not like what you give them overnight. Most things don't change overnight, but you can help somebody begin changing overnight. So with that short introduction, I'll give some more introductions. That's what I'm going to speak about, how to host your Passover, how to host your first Seder. But the truth is, this class or workshop or program, whatever you want to call it, presentation, is not just for those that are going to host. So whether you'll be a host or you'll be a guest or you'll be a participant, my goal here is to really demonstrate how the Passover Seder can be turned into a meaningful journey. A journey, I'm using that word very particularly. Not just adhering to certain traditions and customs, but actually a journey into your soul and a journey to find some type of freedom in your life. Now, truth be told, I have talked about this topic a number of times in different ways, and we have a whole array of resources. If you go to our website and you search for Passover Seder, probably we have a good 5-10 serious articles that are not just articles, they actually have exercises and different approaches how to make a Seder come alive. Obviously, I'll be talking about some things will be overlapping, but I will be sharing some new ideas. Talk about the fact that there's the 15 steps of the Seder, there's the 4 cups of wine, there's the 3 matzahs, there's the different, there's the Seder plate, and many different aspects of the evening. Obviously, I'm not going to cover it all in this one talk. However, see this as a supplement to what I've already has been discussed, and it's great stuff there. You can print it out. Actually, I have a very nice 2-pager that's like a 15 steps, short steps, but it's translated into psychological terminology. That's the key thing here. You could open up any Haggadah. Haggadah is the booklet that is used in the Seder experience. People follow a certain booklet, like a guide. But there are many different editions and different types that work for you. But what's lacking in all of them is they talk mostly the technical part of it. And the deeper meaning, or understanding it as, like I said, a journey, a personal journey, is something you're not going to find very common. Now, here's not the time and place to say why is it missing when it seems to be the most important aspect of it all. Well, there's a lot of questions we have like that, and I don't want to spend time right now. I've done this other times in my classes. Maybe some of it has been lost in translation, as they say, over the years. So we remain with the so-called relics of the traditions, and the spirit often has been either forgotten or neglected. But that doesn't mean we cannot reclaim it, because it's there for our taking. And as you shall see, and I will try to do justice to this, it really can be a truly transformative experience. So that's what we'll be doing now, is going through the Seder. As I said, I'm doing this as think of it this, like I'm training trainers right now, like a training session. But I'll speak about it in the language that anybody can really apply it. So a few key things to begin with. Whatever I'm going to be discussing obviously has to be adapted to your own personal style. That's my first statement. And also, you have to also not just adapt it to your style, but also to the people that you're hosting or that are at your Passover or Seder table. The different people have different needs and have different attention spans, different interests. And I've seen this, this mistake made, that many people try to turn the Passover Seder into a very serious personal journey. But remember, you're talking about at night, and the Seders can take long. By the end of the time, you can end up 3 o'clock in the morning eating the meal because you're busy on a psychological emancipation for 6 hours. So you have to be practical as well. And my point is here, that's not about how much, this is not about quantity, it's about quality. The key thing is to have the punchline of the different aspects of the Seder and then adapt it to the particular audience. Some people get very hungry very quickly, and I've had this at my own Seder table. When are we going to eat? And yeah, you could talk psychology all day, you could talk about people's inhibitions and fears and so on. As a member once at my table, I said something and someone said, you know what? I go to therapy 3 times a week. I didn't come here for another group therapy session. When are we going to eat? Because I said, I remember I invited people, I said, does anybody have any questions? So I thought there'll be some type of profound personal question. What's the relevance of Passover? No, he wants to know when we're going to eat. So what I did was I took him to the kitchen. I said, eat. We will soon catch up with you. I didn't want him to feel, deprived. So he ate. But the fact of the matter, the meal, as you know, doesn't begin at the beginning. Frankly, if it began at the beginning, people would leave right after the meal. Maybe that's why. But whatever the reason is. But it's actually in the middle. It's the 10th step of the 15 steps. Shulchan Aruch, the meal is the 10th step. So there's 9 steps before that. So you have to be practical in how you do this. And you have to have a good sense of humor. Because as I said, some people are not already, there are people very intense. I remember, as I said, I had many Seder tables. I remember one part of the table loved it. They wanted, they were into self-help and to personal growth and character development, and that. And the other side of the table, they were just saying, they smelled the food in the kitchen. And they said they want to eat. And we gave them a good meal. So you have to realize your audience is very vital here. So you can be right in your head, but you got to know who you're talking to. And that's why I'm saying this, because even though, it's obvious, but sometimes you get caught up in making it so relevant that it ends up being very relevant, but not practical. So that's that side of the story. As I said, the key thing is, and I can tell you, I remember a Seder at least 9-10 years ago. As a matter of fact, it had such an impact that this year, a couple came to see me. They live in Florida, and they told me they remembered the Seder of 10 years ago. That's how much it had an impact on them. They wanted to follow up. So I felt very gratified by that, because it meant that I asked them, what did they hear? It was just a few lines that they heard. They heard something that was relevant to them. And that can make the whole difference. So it's not about loading it heavy. The Seder is filled with a lot of heavy stuff, trust me. Every step is rich with, as I said, with tradition and meaning and mystical meaning and spiritual meaning. But everything, and good education, a good teacher is not someone that knows how to pour it on. It's someone who also knows how to exercise restraint. The best teachers you'll ever meet, you learn much more from, you learn most from them is not what they said, but what they didn't say. Between the lines, why they said just enough. So you can use it. If it's overwhelming, it becomes like, think of rain that comes down like a flood. It'll destroy the fields. Rain has to come as raindrops. What's a raindrop? It's restraint. It's water, but it comes as drops that can be absorbed in the ground before the next drop comes. That's the key in all, like spoon feeding. You have to know who you're speaking to, and you have to make sure that they're absorbing it and it's not coming at too fast and not too slow either. So it has to maybe a little over their head sometimes, but not completely over the head, and in a way that they can do something with it. So that's really the greater art, is not just to say the right thing, but also how to say it, but most importantly, to know whom you're saying it to, because two people may need to hear the same idea differently. so they can do something with it. And I find this very often with very good teachers. They're brilliant, but it's more about them transmitting information and data as opposed to really gauging and measuring who they're speaking to. So but the language of the Kabbalists, they're giving a lot of a lot of energy and light, but it's not commensurate to the containers. And a really good teacher knows how to take the light and put it in a container that the student can take, and then later do much with it, unpack it at their pace. That's really much more a greater art than just conveying important and even relevant information. Now, irrelevant information I'm not even mentioning. That's altogether. That's not no energy and no containers. So in that context, let me make a few key points with Passover, and some things that you may be familiar with, some things you may not be, but I think it's a critical thing to, before you begin any Seder, to simply explain why we're here. It's like running a meeting. You're running a meeting, what's the objective of the meeting? Why are we here? So most people say we're here because we're doing a tradition that's been done for 3,330 years, and that's how we honor Passover. That's not a relevant answer. That's an answer that's keeping up a tradition. But why? Why do we do this tradition? So in simple English, let's go back to the story of Passover. What's the story? The Jews were enslaved for 210 years. Most people don't even know that. It wasn't for 10 years or 15 years like the Nazis. We're talking about 210 years under the rule of Nazis. They were called Egyptians. And they literally enslaved the Jewish people in a physical sense. It took time. They didn't do it overnight. But just like with the Germans, first the propaganda, and then the brainwashing, and then getting the people to start seeing the Jews as a threat. A step process of demonizing the enemy, the people you consider your enemy, and then actually enslaving them physically, psychologically, spiritually. The Holocaust is a very good example. Good. It's not. I don't want to use the word good, but it's a very apropos example to exactly what happened 3,300 more than 30 years ago. So for 210 years, these details I'm just giving some background. I'm not saying you have to share it all. What happened on the 15th day of Nisan, which is the Hebrew month of Nisan, the month we're in, and that's when Passover begins. Friday night will be the 15th, the full moon of this month. Remember, the Hebrew calendar goes by the lunar cycle, as opposed to, let's say, the Gregorian calendar, which is a solar cycle, which is a solar year. And the lunar cycle is very clear. You look up in the sky, you can know what day in the month you are. A new moon will always be the first day of the month. The 15th of the day will be a full moon. The 7th of the month will be the first quarter. And the 22nd of the month will be the third quarter. So you can more or less approximate, if you see the moon, what day in the month it is. Passover is always going to be in a full moon, as the Bible describes, that God showed Moses the new moon 2 weeks earlier and said, this will be the month of the redemption of my people, of your people. And as promised, 2 weeks later to the day, on the 15th of Nisan, after many challenges and many difficulties in the 10 plagues and everything, finally Pharaoh and the Egyptians had no choice but to release and let the Jews go. Let my people go, so they shall serve me. And that's what happened. They marched out of Egypt on the 15th of Nisan. And every year, hence, we honor that for 7-8 days. The holiday is a 7-8 day period, as the Bible describes. Now, what's the significance of this event? That's the key here. Because if we're going to commemorate, what are we commemorating? So, again, on a very basic level, most people say, okay, something that happened so long ago, and we always remember it. We remember, we commemorate, we honor, and we commemorate special events. We became a nation then. So we never forget the fact that we were once oppressed, and we also remember other people that are oppressed, which is very much part of the whole social justice that Judaism teaches. Never forget those, the downtrodden, and the people who are less privileged, as you were once less privileged, and once you were a stranger in another land, and you were redeemed. So that's a beautiful message as it is. But it's much, much deeper than that, and much, much more relevant than that. Because then you could say, okay, it's an event that happened thousands of years ago that we remember. The way the mystics put it, they say, is that time is like a spiral. The reason we honor our birthdays is not just because we remember we were born 20, 30, whatever years ago. Is because that point in time Remember, like a spiral, not as the cliche goes that time is like the river of time that runs past, present, future in a like a vertical line or horizontal line like a river, but rather like a spiral. So time is energy, and this energy returns to the same point of the axis, but a different point on the axis that was there the first time. So every year our birthday is recreated, the same energy that happened when you entered this world. And the same thing is with Rosh Hashanah, the same thing with Yom Kippur, same thing with Passover. And the 15th of the month, meaning this Friday night, a spiritual window opens up, which is a repeat. Not exact repeat, because I said like a spiral, not like it's not a circle, it's not a cycle, but a spiral. So at the same point, whatever happened, whatever energy happened that day, happens again now, every year again. So what happened? And what is the deeper significance of the leaving from Egypt? The Hebrew word for Egypt, and this is the key to it all. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. Egypt is just a word. Mitzrayim has a meaning. Generally, Hebrew language is a metaphorical language as opposed to, let's say, the Latin languages like English or French or Russian or Spanish, Italian. The metaphorical meaning of Mitzrayim has a meaning. It literally means boundaries or constraints. As soon as you hear that, it takes on a whole different meaning. It's not just a geographical location called Egypt. It's actually an archetype. It's a state of being, a state of constraints, of inhibitions, of being trapped somewhere. So Mitzrayim is really a condition more than just a location. And it's a condition that is here just as it was 3,330 years ago. And that's what repeats every year. The power to get out of all our constraints and limitations. What the constraints and limitations are, you know better than anyone. So I would begin any Seder, I would say, I'd make that statement, we're here tonight to recreate an experience that happened so many thousands of years ago, and now we have an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, or once a year, but once in a lifetime as far as this year goes, to be able to actually free ourselves from some of the tentacles and the traps, the trappings, and fears and insecurities that we deal with. So what I would say, the first thing you say to everybody at the table, to make this evening meaningful, let us, everyone in their own mind, you don't have to spell it out to yourself, think of 3 things. And if you can't think of 3, find 1. What things that you really want to eliminate in your life? What issues, so to speak, block you? Some people may say it's fears of financial worries. Some people say I'd like to find a good, healthy relationship. I seem to be blocked there. Some say I just have inner demons that I'm trying to get over. Again, it's not important people have to spell it out, but tell them that this Seder is here to serve you. It's not here to serve the Seder is here to serve you as a journey that will help you get beyond your, whatever the Mitzrayim of your life, and you fill in the blanks. Because by doing that, just by doing that, you have already opened up the door that the whole experience is about them, not just we're here to follow some traditions. It's about you. And then as soon as you ask yourself that question, what is it? What is the single most, if you were able to have a conversation with God right now, and you could ask whatever you want for, what would you ask? And be wise about it. Don't ask for a back scratcher because you have a little scratch at this moment. In other words, don't ask for a short-term and instant gratification. Think about something that really is valuable. When King Solomon was given that offer, what did he ask for? He asked for wisdom. Because if he has wisdom, he'll have everything else. So you have to be smart in what you ask for. So that's how I would begin, by simply telling people, before we begin the Seder, think about something that is your Mitzrayim, that is your limitation. And it could be, across the board, there could be many, many different things. You can give some examples so people just have a little sense of what it is. And keep that in mind through the evening, because what we're going to be doing tonight, in this Seder, is actually steps that can help you develop tools and methods to actually free yourself from whatever it is that you need to be freed from. So then Mitzrayim takes on much more as a dimension, more than just a land somewhere in Egypt, somewhere in the Middle East, but it actually is a force inside of you, a state of being, a condition, a human condition. And with that, we begin the 15 steps. There's the 15 steps of the Seder. Now, I'm not going to go through, I will go through the 15 briefly, but if you go online again, there's a very, what is it called, the 15 steps. It's a free download that you can get. It's like it's a nice colorful printout. You could have a whole bunch of them that you can hand out if you're going to host a Seder, or even if you're not hosting, even if you're a guest, you can bring it. It's very easy to use because it's not long. It's not pages upon pages. It's literally 2 pages, back to back, or 2 separate pages. And it's nice. It basically spells out the 15 steps, but it spells them out in psychological terms. And I'm going to go through them now shortly. So this introduction is critical because what you did now is you essentially stated the mission and the purpose of this so-called, I don't call it meeting, but this ceremony that we're going to do now. Now, I would also throw into the fact that the evening here is not meant to be just a one-way street. It's meant to be, it's all in context of a conversation. For example, the Haggadah itself, which is the booklet that we use, what does the Haggadah mean? You know what the word Haggadah means? To relate. A story. Haggadah means the story, the narrative. So it comes from the word in the verse in the Torah that says, V'higadato levincha. After they left Egypt, God says to Moses, tell them, Jewish people, and they shall tell the story to their children. You shall relate to your children. It's 2 words, but such a beautiful and impactful message. Tell the story to your children. Tell the narrative. And that's what the Jews have been doing for 3,330 years. We tell the story. As I said before, by my introduction, the story sometimes has become somewhat a little lifeless, mechanical. But that doesn't mean it has to be that way. Every story can be told. You know, you sometimes see a storyteller, they tell you a story and they put you to sleep, which may be some function, at least some purpose. And then there are people, the story, and they animate you, they excite you. So obviously it's how you tell the story. So how we tell the story is the key here. Tell the story. And that's why the whole thing is called Haggadah. So really Haggadah, if you think about it, is just really the name, we're telling the story. But it's interesting, a story, usually a person, it's a storyteller, it's a one-way, you tell the story and the listeners listen. With the Haggadah, it's different, because there's another expression in the verse that says, Ki yishalcha bincha, when your child will ask. So the Haggadah is done in a form of question and answer. That's why we have the 4 kashas, the 4 questions. And if you look through the Haggadah, you'll see, when we relate the story, you see that the scholars and the sages, they would spend Passover night at the Seder talking about it and engaging with each other. So it makes it even more fascinating. It's not just a one-way story. Someone's telling you a story. It's interactive. Now I know these are all catchwords today, interactive and stuff like that, but this is essentially, Passover goes back, I said, it was always interactive. That's what made it so alive. Because, even no matter how inspiring a teacher could be, there's nothing like an interactive experience. Because interactive means it's not just you're listening, you're also speaking, and it's a back and forth. So I would invite the people, again, this all depends, again, the type of people, and how large the group is. If it's a larger group, it's harder to do this, but a smaller group for sure, that make it engaging. Let's talk about things and let them get people, provoke them. And that's not my words. It's actually one of the ways we provoke the children that the Talmud and the Jewish law says, by having them ask questions. We do things differently tonight. Why is it called Manishtana Halayla Hazeh? Why is this night different than all other nights? We intentionally do things differently because we want to provoke the children, and the children also means the inner child in each one of us, the curiosity. Why do we do this differently? So the same thing, if you want to make your Seder come alive, do it in a provocative way, meaning bring up topics that engage people, that people can argue about, that people can question and answer. And it doesn't even matter whether you end up having a clear answer. The main thing is that people have been engaged, have been stimulated, and are involved, are animated. So now comes the actual Seder, goes the 15 steps, which begins with Kaddish, the first one, the first step. Some steps are very short, and some of them are longer. as I'll point out shortly. So Kaddish is pretty much, you fill up the first cup of wine, and this is after the kaira, the table, Seder plate is prepared. I'm not going to talk much about the Seder plate per se, because firstly, I have already, you can find online resources at meaningfullife.com. Secondly, some of the things of the Seder plate are used through these 15 steps. I'm using the 15 steps because that's the easiest way to describe the journey, because it's actually going through 15 steps from Kaddish to Nirtza, which is the end of the Haggadah. So Kaddish literally means to sanctify. And how do we do it? We fill up a cup of wine, the first of 4 cups, and we all hold it, and we say together Kiddush. What's the significance of Kaddish? In the context of this journey toward becoming a freer human being, and remember, you're keeping in mind something that is your Mitzrayim, your inhibition, or your fear. So the first thing in any type of journey, if you're stuck, whatever that you filled in the blanks that you feel you're stuck in, how do you get out of a stuck place? You know? And we all know we always try to get out of a stuck place, and we get even more stuck, because you get back into a rut, and we start repeating patterns and so on and so forth. So one of the key things in getting out stuck, of course, there's one way someone just really just pulls you out of it. But if you want to pull yourself out, one of the ways is you have to create a new space. You see this all the time. People are, what do they say? Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. You need to change something, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. I know that's a brilliant cause and effect, but that's the fact. If you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. It's a mathematical certainty. Okay, so what do you need to do? You need to shift. Kaddish is a shift. You're creating a sacred space. You say, you know what? Whatever happened till now, yesterday, 2 days ago, 100 years ago, whatever, my past, my childhood, my traumas, whatever you want to call it, that's the past. Today is a new night. It's a night where a new energy enters existence and into my life. But you cannot bring the old baggage, because if you do, you're not going to have the space for growth. So Kaddish is really what they call today creating space, sometimes called sacred space. Space, quiet. You're getting out of whatever mode, whatever mindset, whatever heart set, whatever attitude you have, and you're coming in with a new attitude. And yes, with a smile. So if you feel that day happened to be a down day and you feel really this, maybe just take a moment before the Seder and wipe off the smirk on your face or the bitterness and say, you know what? There's hope. Remember, the foundation of all growth is knowing things can change. If you're trapped in a place where you think nothing can change, then you know what you've done. You've written your own script. Nothing will change. Now, of course, miracles happen and God can be merciful and so on. But let's be honest, if you don't feel something's going to change, even if you get all the blessings and there are people coming to you and helping you, but you not feel confident in it, what's going to happen? It'll all be wasted. So Kaddish is like why we begin, but frankly, this is why we begin everything in Judaism. You'll see Shabbos, we start with Kiddush. By a wedding ceremony, they make on a cup of wine. Because wine is a sacred drink, and making a blessing on it creates a sacred moment. Another word for Kaddish is actually sanctity, is separation. You're separating the mundane from the holy. You're saying that whatever was going on today is the past, now I'm creating a new space. So it doesn't mean your life has changed, it doesn't mean you suddenly freed yourself from all your past, but at least you're giving it a chance by saying, you know what, okay. I see this all the time, people come for advice, and they come with all their bitterness and all their anger and all their past. And the first step is you try to you want to create some clear space, because all that is so overwhelming that you can't even bring in something new. There's no room for fresh air because the toxic air is filling the entire room. You got to open a window. And all healing comes, every infection comes from festering in a closed space, and you want fresh air. But a person could be their own worst enemy. And you say, let's do something fresh. I say, my life is so difficult, I don't have no fresh air. So I said, we need to open the window a bit. So Kaddish is also a type of separation and sanctifying. They're entering a new space called the Seder night. And that leads you right away, after Kiddush, there's Urchatz. We go wash our hands. This is one of the only time actually of the year. We usually wash our hands when? Before a meal. Here there's not going to be a meal. And I know I've dealt with this many times. People think they're washing, we're going to eat a meal now. No, that's not happening. There's another washing later. Step number is what? 8, 7? We'll get to that. This is washing, and what we do is, it's somewhat of anticlimactic. You take a piece of potato, something vegetable, or an onion or whatever, and you dip it in salt water. And that's it. And I remember one person telling me, I came all the way here for that? I heard there's going to be a good meal here, back to the meal. Anyway, so urchatz, what's the significance of washing your hands? So you all know what a mikveh is. A mikveh is total immersion. But here, obviously, as I said, if we're going to go into a mikveh, the night's really going to be a long one. So there's a thing called washing our hands. It's a mini type of mikveh. We don't wash our entire bodies. We don't immerse, but we immerse our hands. Why our hands? Because our hands is the main tools and instruments that a person uses in this material world. It's true our legs and other parts of our body also use, but your hands are the things that you grab things, that you hold things, that you interact with the hands. So we sanctify our spirits through Kaddish, and then comes Rechatz, where we sanctify physically. Water is not because you're cleaning your hands. It's not about because dirty hands. It's more spiritual. It's more symbolic. That you wash your hands again, that your hands are now clean from your past. So it's yet another step of separating from the past, entering a new space. There is Akash or Chatz. I may need a Haggadah here. But do you have a Haggadah here or something? Yeah, give me a siddur if you don't mind. Okay, after that comes karpas. So these again are short steps really, they don't take long. Karpas literally means some type of vegetable, something from the world of the vegetable world. Say some people use potato. My custom I grew up was a piece of onion. But generally that's something of that nature, and you dip it in salt water. Now, most people comes to this, they have no clue. Why do we do this type of weird thing? I mean, we like to put salt on things, but why salt water and why vegetable? So briefly, and again, I'm saying maybe more than you need to say when you're doing a Seder, but it's good to be informed and knowledgeable because you never know when you're going to use, it's good to have this in your arsenal, so to speak. I don't even know if there has a God in here. Does it? Probably. We'll find it. So karpas is symbolic of the following. Yeah, it is here actually. It's symbolic. The vegetable is symbolic of something earthy, because vegetables come from the earth. What's symbolic of earthy? It's the matter. Salt water is symbolic of tears. Water, it's moisture. So you're basically immersing the body, the material, and matter, your body into your soul, essentially. The Kabbalists like to say that tears bathe your soul. Healthy tears. I'm not talking about tears of sadness and tragedy and grief. Healthy tears bathe your soul. And as they bathe your soul, they sanctify, not the word sanctify, they refine. This is a form of refinement. So this is symbolic of taking matter, taking the physical matter of this world and sublimating it into water. Now, if you think about it, I said before about washing your hands, that's also water. It's a form of a mikveh. This too is a form of submersion. What's the point of it? This is going to be a central theme throughout the Haggadah, throughout the Seder. And that theme is, I'm introducing a theme called bittul. You may have heard me talk about it many times. Bittul means, it's a Hebrew word, but it means a form of humility, modesty. But maybe the best way to translate it is suspending yourself and your ego in presence of something greater. This, my friends, is one of the key secret ingredients to getting beyond any type of Mitzrayim in your life. Why? Because it means you don't allow yourself to become consumed with your pain. One of the key challenges in any type of growth, especially someone who's had anything that they're really trapped in or stuck, is, as I mentioned, you become your own worst enemy. This becomes, you start identifying with it. And you don't really feel you can free yourself from it. This is one of the biggest problems. A person who has suffered any form of trauma, someone who has in any way been abused, any form of, anything that causes them pain, especially psychic pain and emotional pain, the greatest trap is they don't feel they can get out of it. So one of the things that bittul does is saying, immerse yourself in something else. Don't think about yourself so much. This being consumed with yourself actually becomes your own worst enemy. You say, what do you mean? Why should I think about myself? I'm in pain. Yeah, but that's exactly, the more you think about it, the more you identify with the pain, and the more you become a product of it, or even a victim of it. So bittul is a beautiful idea. It's like the idea where someone says, you know what? Put everything aside. We need you right now to volunteer for something very important. You say, but I'm not in a good mood. I'm down today. Call back tomorrow. So that's precisely why you should go there. That's the best way to get out of the good mood and get out of a bad mood. Instead of saying, once I get out of the bad mood, I'll do good things and it'll get you out of the bad mood. I know it sounds simple, but many people just simply don't realize that. They say, I'm not. Then you are basically allowing yourself to define what you should be doing, and what's yourself like. Yourself is miserable, so therefore you're perpetuating the misery. Maybe that's exactly what you should be doing, not what you don't want to do. It's exactly what you should be doing. So this is essentially what is called in Hasidic terminology bittul, that it's like a soldier in an army. You're not in the mood, but you're in an army, and you've been recruited and drafted. This is the job. We're waking up 5:30 in the morning, whether you like it or not, and you're going to get 300 pounds on your back, and you're going to climb up a wet mountain against completely. But you know what that does? It creates discipline, and it creates a commitment to something that's greater than your mood. And that's why it lifts you up to a greater place. Now you say, 1 second, that sounds like slavery. No, we're not talking about enslaved by somebody who's doing it to take advantage of you. We're talking about someone doing it to train you to be greater than yourself. And sometimes you need that pressure. And pressure is not a bad thing in that way. So you're talking about slavery would be the Egyptians, or an enemy that uses and exploits and abuses people for their own benefits. That's, of course, unhealthy. But if you're talking about a coach that kicks you in the pants and says you can be excellent, and I'm not satisfied with you just being good, that's not slavery. That's called freedom. So freedom should not be confused with comfort zones. People think, if I'm comfortable, I'm free. That's not true. I mentioned before, you can be very comfortable and be completely enslaved. You just don't want to move out of your comfort zone. So slavery, there's, yes, physical slavery, and there's emotional slavery. And bittul, in a way, counterintuitively, is actually what frees you from your own traps. And that's why you'll see the theme of bittul throughout the whole Seder, which I'll be talking about a little more. In Kaddish, it's the sanctifying. In washing your hands, what are you doing? Everything you're doing is getting you from one place to another place. And then comes this dipping. The dipping is showing that matter, the matter of your life, the earthiness of your life, should not be a self-contained entity. Submerge it in warm or salty waters, like the ocean. And there's something cleansing about it, something purifying about it. Not just physical purifying, a type of. So if you can visualize it, it's an exercise, this third step. It's an exercise that helps you do the same in your own personal life. Get out of your own way, submerge in something greater. We're sitting at a Seder now. Don't bring all your baggage. When I say don't bring, of course bring it, but don't let it haunt you. Allow yourself to be submersed in something deeper. I've seen this very many times when people commit to something, and they must get it done, like, you know the deadline's tomorrow morning. So even if they're in a bad mood, or if they're down, or something happens, the commitment carries you through. And it's a great blessing to have that. Because if you rely purely on your mood, you'll say, I'm not in the mood, I'm tired, I'm going to go to sleep. Tomorrow's another day. Procrastination enters. So there we have yet another theme of bittul. Then we go to step 4. It has everything here except the steps. Oh. Because it's that, yeah, okay, fine. I'm sure there's a God here somewhere. Yeah, I'll remember. I remember them, but just wanted to double check. So we went to Karpas, now we're into Yachatz. The next step is yet another form of bittul. And again, for those that are going to be doing what I'm suggesting here, you don't have to do all of them elaborately. You could just touch upon one or two, yeah, and or a few of them. The key again is impact. Look at the people and see. Here we go. and see what's resonating with them. And if it resonates, and of course, as I said, invite questions and comments. And that is a key to seeing what's working better than others. So what's yachatz? Is yet another form of bittul. You take, in the Seder plate, it works like this. There are 3 matzahs, which correspond to 3 dimensions. On top of the matzahs usually is a plate underneath, is some covering. And then there's what they call the kaira. How do you translate the kaira? The Seder plate, with the different items on it. The step of yachatz is you take the middle matzah of the 3 and you crack it into 2 parts. Best is to do like 2/3 and 1/3. And you leave the 1/3 in the Seder plate, and the second and this 2/3 piece, or it doesn't have to be measured. You don't have to sit with a ruler, and start measuring, which is the bigger piece. That's the piece which was called afikoimen, that will be eaten like dessert at the end of the meal in many later steps. So this is called yachatz. Yachatz literally means to break. What's the significance of breaking? Well, a matzah is the food of what? Of bittul. Matzah is the alter ego to ego. Alter ego to ego. I never thought of that. Here we go. Matzah is made up of flour and water, but it's not allowed to inflate. That's why it's a flat, like cracker type. Inflated ego, like bread, is a lot of air. That's called ego. Matzah is the minimal, so it's baked in a way that does not allow it to rise. It doesn't rise. And you break the matzah is another form of bittul. This is basically experiencing again a form of, I would call it sublimation, where you are recognizing that no man is an island unto themselves. No person is an island. We all need something else. We all need a break. We need to be broken. 1 second, but let me explain. Not broken, God forbid, in a bad way, but broken in a way recognizing that to be complete, you need others. It's a form of humility and a good form of humility. Like Hillel said, on one hand, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But on the other hand, if I'm only for myself, what am I? And it's one of the key things in life is to know that we need friends, we need love, we need companionship, and we need people. Not because we're desperate and not because we are not capable to do things on our own, is because you achieve greater things when you have someone that can complement you. It's like getting the objectivity that you may not have completely, because we're all subjective creatures. So this theme is essentially the breaking of the matzah, is recognizing that we're not a complete self-contained entity. It's about sharing, give and take in this world. And if you look in nature, everything in nature is that way. Flowers are pollinated by the bees, and the bees in turn get the nectar. Everything is give and take. There's no such thing as a self-contained entity in nature. Everything is giving and everyone is receiving. So it's an understanding of almost a symbiotic relationship between you and everyone else at the table and anywhere, and also we and nature. That's the symbolism of yachatz. We go now to step number 5, and this is the longest step in the Haggadah. And it actually has the same meaning as Haggadah, magid. But magid is the verb, to tell. Haggadah means the story, and magid means to narrate, to relate the story, to narrate, to tell the story. Magid is essentially begins with questions and answers, the famous 4 questions that the children are asked. And if you think about it, many people don't understand the significance of questions. But let me just point it out to you, because it's a tremendous significance. And I use this all the time. It's a tremendous insight. And also preempts one of the biggest questions that people have about religion in general. Most people identify with religion in this modern world as being a somewhat, I'll call it, let's see, that's the word I want to use, a primitive, narrow-minded approach to life. That once we have science and the free inquiry of science, we don't need to rely on the dogma, that's the word I was looking for, the dogma of religion. And religion basically dictates to you, and each religion does it in its own way, but they all have one common denominator, that it dictates to you what you must do. This is what God wants you to do, and you don't have any right to challenge that. And religion is often taught and imposed upon children in school and at home in a way that is very impositional, meaning it's not something that you are asked, and if you ask questions, questions are considered to be irreverent and unacceptable. People who ask questions sometimes are excommunicated, either literally or figuratively, because questions are, what they call questions are challenge the system. So think of it this way. If you really want to understand the power of something, sometimes you have to look at our enemies. It says our enemies make us wise. The enemy knows where to focus in on your strengths. So if sometimes you want to know what your strengths are, look at what your enemy is attacking. Every totalitarian regime in history, every fascist leader, every despot, every dictator, what is the first thing that a fascist regime that wants total absolute control, what do? The first thing they do is they establish a Bureau of Truth and Information. They basically control mind control. What's called, they need to control the media, they need to control the newspapers, the airwaves, the radio, TV. In our modern time, in olden times, there was no TV, radio, they controlled the flow of information. Because why? Because what's most threatening to any totalitarian regime is challenge. And they don't want you to know that there's another approach. I remember former Soviet Union, where my parents come from, where you come from, was a place until around 1990 that was literally a country that enslaved hundreds of millions of people, but many of them thought they were emancipated because they didn't know of another option. Very well read, a lot of science, but truly free thinking was a threat to the Soviet regime. Anyone that was a free thinker was imprisoned. Writers, poets, artists. They wanted complete obedience. And religion is the opiate of the masses. Religion was a threat because religion means you're not answering to the, well, the Tsar was before, but you're not answering to the party. You're answering to yourself or to God. So I remember 1980, in the mid-80s, as a relative of mine went to former Soviet Union, and I remember they came back with an English newspaper. There was they had an English Soviet newspaper. And I kid you not, it was like a tabloid, maybe 20, 25 pages, maybe less. On the front page was a picture that looked like a ghost town, literally. Like one burning, dim lamp burning. And the headline said, the last New York residents moved out of New York. Basically, New York is now a ghost town. And I'm looking at it, and I say, at first I thought it was like a joke. But this is what's being fed. Now, no one can argue. How do you know? They didn't have photographers. There was no internet. There was no anything. But this is what it said. New York. The last people in New York City have moved out because of the crime. And then they explained that how the wild animals are returning. I mean, literally like a wilderness. As far from the truth as possible. I'm not going to say New York isn't a jungle, but not that type. What do they call it? They call it the Bronx Zoo, right? I remember we had a new principal in school. So someone asked him, "So what did you accomplish with the school since you came?" And he says, "I turned the jungle into a zoo." I remember that's what he said. Okay. So bottom line, going back, and I saw that. Then I remember my father telling me my father was a journalist, and I knew this. What's the number one newspaper in Russia? What's the name of it? Would you believe the name is called Pravda, the Truth? What would you think about a newspaper that says, why don't you subscribe to this newspaper, it's called The Truth? Would you ever trust a newspaper that calls itself The Truth? The New York Times has recently been trying to say we're the truth. I think they're, it's like someone saying, trust me. If I want to trust you, I'll trust you. You don't have to tell me to trust you, or command me to trust you. And there was a Yiddish communist newspaper, you know what it was called? Emes. Emes in Hebrew, in Yiddish, means truth. But it's interesting. It's spelled, if you know how Emes is spelled, Aleph Mem Saf, if you know Hebrew. There it was spelled Ayin Mem Ayin Samach. It's like misspelling it completely. So I used to think to myself, maybe the editor-in-chief was really, he had no choice. But he wanted to like hint to smart Jews and realize and say, you know, even the title is wrong. But no one knew. Only those Jews would know that it's misspelled. I don't know, maybe. The point is mind control. Questions are absolutely unacceptable. There are no questions. Did you read 1984? What happens when you ask questions? War is peace. Truth is lies. Right? Intelligent, I remember all the other, what they call future speak, what was it called there? Newspeak. 1984, which was George Orwell wrote, basically he was writing about the Soviet Union. But he wrote it, you know, he wrote it in, masked it in this type of like fictional story. Questions are not allowed. So what is the greatest way to celebrate freedom? Passover is freedom. The right to ask questions. And that's why Jews, from the beginning of time, and I'm going back 3,000, long before there was a concept called democracy, long before there was a thing called a free country, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, thousands of years. The whole Seder night is built on questions and questions. And you encourage children from a young age, ask questions. So someone say, well, you know, you tell them what to ask. No, that's just the structure of it. The point is to ask. You have a right to ask questions. Why do you have a right? Because you are a sacred human being and you have the dignity and the majesty and of having the right to ask a question. You don't understand something, you're allowed to ask. And no monarch and no leader and no one can tell you not to ask. To silence somebody is basically robbing them from their right to be. If you want to put it in therapeutic terms, they say silence is worse than the rape, in very sharp terms. Why? Because one thing is a crime being violated. Another is that you're not even allowed to challenge and say, no, it never happened. That's the ultimate humiliation. Even worse than the crime is the invalidation. You're not even allowed to be in pain because you're living an illusion, because it makes everybody uncomfortable. It never happened. So even though obviously you can't compare it to the magnitude of the actual crime and violation, but psychologically, in many ways it's even worse because it means you can't even heal. You don't even have a right to heal. You have no right to challenge. You have no right to say an injustice happened. That's far worse than the injustice, the cover-up. So what is Passover? What is Magid? The central part. This is the central part of the Passover Seder. This takes the longest time, actually. From here on, it's going to go all the way till we'll soon get to the other steps, but we're going to read. It'll begin with the children asking questions, and the custom is that not only the children, everyone asks questions. And yes, it's a structure of 4 particular questions, but it's really meant to be open the door for all questions. Obviously, you can't ask all the questions in one night, but you have the right to ask. And I think conveying that to people, especially who may have stereotypes and misconceptions about what true religion is. And I should qualify what I just said. When I say misconception, it may not be a misconception because they may have grown up in a dogmatic environment. When I say misconception, is that the dogmatic environment had no right to define Judaism. They're the problem. Judaism is all about question. Open up a Talmud. If you ever look at a Talmud, even one page, you tell me how the text. Everything is argued about. They don't stop arguing. You ever see Jews argue? They always argue. As a speaker, I can tell you, travel. You know, I travel around and I speak. I can tell you right away. You know, their audiences, they listen, and you could see they're engaged. Jews, most cases, they're right away. Nah, I don't like what he's saying. Nah, I heard that joke. You know, and they make sure that as you're speaking, you know what they're thinking. You know? Yeah. Fine, I'm not saying, but it comes from somewhere. You know, it comes from a certain independent spirit. You look at the Talmud, the greatest of sages will say something, and his colleague will say, no, the verse says opposite, and they'll get into an argument. It's always a peaceful argument, by the way. We're not talking about personalizing. It's not petty, and it's not doesn't spill over in any type of personal way, which is unfortunately what happens in most people who argue. But it's an argument. There's respect for each people's opinion. And you're entitled, not only entitled to ask, you're obligated to ask. Leha Baishan Lamed, it says, the bashful will not learn. Now, if you think about it today, this sounds like so contemporary, and yeah, this sounds like this is the modern world. But you know what? 400 years ago, 300 years ago, this was not common at all. No one did this. I challenge you to find one society, whether in the East or in the Western world, that encouraged people to just, there was no such thing as human rights. You had the right to ask. You couldn't challenge your parents. You couldn't challenge your community. You couldn't challenge, definitely not the leader, who was like chosen by God. So the leader could be completely corrupt, whether it was the church or it was the monarch, or whoever it may be. By Jews, it was always sacred questions. Now, I should qualify. There's two ways to be skeptical. There's two ways to ask questions. Some people ask questions are just coming from an unhealthy place. They're just trying to find excuses. So whatever you tell them, they always have another question, another question, another question. They're not looking for the truth. And smart people, they know how to cover their tracks, and they use arguments simply to feel good, or just to get what they want, or just to stay in their place. Healthy skepticism is this. You can ask anything you like, but the intention is to really grow. And I would like to have an answer. And if the answer has consequences which make me uncomfortable, I will not resist hearing them just because I don't like it. Because that's not intellectually honest. Unfortunately, many people who ask questions, they make it sound like, yes, I'm a skeptic, I'm an open-minded person, but they're so open-minded, they don't hear a word, anything, unless it fits their agenda. Unfortunately, there are many people like that. Because they may be smart, but they're playing mind games, and they hide their insecurities behind their smartness. Like one guy once told me about someone, he hides his ignorance with his arrogance. You know? So people do that. But then there's healthy skepticism. Healthy skepticism means, yes, I have a clear mind. You said something, I'm not just taking it for granted because you said it. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but I have a question. I have many questions, and you'll challenge it. And you'll stretch the idea in every angle because you're looking for the truth. And you know what? If the truth is different, you come to a conclusion that it's different than your initial perspective, you'll say, you're right. I have a new way of looking at it. That's an honest person. So that's why I wanted to qualify. So here comes Magid. It's telling the story, but it's not, as I said before, it's an interactive engagement. Now, even if I stop right here, I think you have enough material to run, in my opinion, a brilliant Seder. I'm saying it with full humility because I'm not saying my own ideas. What I mean by that is because the key is personalization. Everything I said here was not just a ritual. It showed how the ritual and the ceremony is part of personal growth. And this is how we grow. We ask questions, we have bittul. We talked about, remember I said, envision something that you find is blocking you. A Mitzrayim in your life. These are the steps. Get out of your comfort zone and ask questions. Even challenge yourself as well. That's also a good way to ask questions. Because you say, why am I stuck in my negative place? That's a pretty good question. You know? As I said, I'm not really going to elaborate on every detail of the 4 questions and stuff like that because whatever I'm saying, I said, is already discussed. I have a whole article about what the meaning of the 4 questions are. So I rely that you'll look that up if you wish. I'm trying to stick to mainly milestones and the highlights. So here goes Magid. The Magid now goes on. Good. Now just for the record, again, more technical advice. When you're running a Seder, when you come to this part, here you really have to pace yourself. There's some people who know Hebrew, but it could be very boring if you don't share some thoughts. Here, I personally believe in trying to create an engaging conversation and maybe going through these next pages and having different people read selections and maybe sharing a thought. That's one way to engage. Again, this is easier done when you have a smaller group. The bigger the group, it becomes more difficult. So here, we move on. This takes us next. The next step will be Magid will go through a whole section here with all kinds of details. I'm not going to go through those details because of time limits. I'm going to jump to the end of it. The end of it is we drink the second cup of wine over a beautiful blessing about redemption. And that leads now to the next. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now comes the next section, another 5. So I said 15, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we'll lead Shulchan Aruch, will be the 11th step, the meal. So what are the next 5 steps after Magid? As I said, Magid is the bulk of the Haggadah. Magid leads into Rochza. We go wash our hands again. But this time, we're getting closer to the treasure, the food. Okay, so Rochza is washing your hands. Why is this washing? Like I said before, washing is always a symbolic of transition. You wash your hands, like you'll see. I mean, like a doctor washes his hands before he sees a patient. You wash your hands before you go to another stage. That we finish stage 1, we go now stage 2, so we wash our hands again. This time you're washing in order to be able to eat the matzah. So this is the first time we drank wine, but we've not yet eaten the matzah. You wash your hands, and then comes moitzi matzah. And matzah, which is you make 2 blessings. The regular blessing you make on bread, which is moitzi lechem min haaretz. And number 2, you make a special blessing because it's matzah. It's not regular bread. So that's rochza moitzi matzah. And this symbolism here, I go back to matzah. Remember, I mentioned everything is the theme of bittul. Matzah itself is the bread of humility. It shows its lack of ego. And number 2, matzah is also flour and water. So if you think about flour and water, what's flour? Flour is from grain. Remember before we took the vegetable and we dipped it in the salt water. Matzah is essentially the same thing. It's something from growth, grain, and water. And we make the blessing on it and we eat it. So it's symbolic again of taking the material of your life and sublimating it. Then comes maror. Maror is literally the bitter herbs. So now we're on step. What step is this? 5, 6, 7, 8. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry. We did 5 steps. Rochza moitzi matzah is like considered 2 steps because moitzi means you take the matzah out of the case that's in, meaning the plate. Matzah. Now comes maror. Why do we eat bitter herbs? So most people say the reason is because we're trying to remember the bitterness of our forefathers, of our ancestors in Egypt. But first of all, let's be honest. A little bitterness from horseradish is not exactly comparable to slavery and bondage. And what's the point? What's the point? Why do we need to feel bitter like they felt bitter? So it's interesting, if you look at the Seder plate, the maror, the bitter herbs are put in the center. Now, according to Kabbalistic structure, something bitter should be to the left. The sweet is to the right, the bitter is to the left. The bitter is in the middle. The reason for that is because it's not about bitterness, it's about compassion. Empathy. Empathy is another tremendous tool and method to find some emancipation. Sometimes when you're so consumed with your own Mitzrayim, with your own trappings and your own inhibitions, you become very selfish and you don't feel another person's pain. One of the key ways to get out of your own way is to feel for another. Empathy. You'll see narcissists have no empathy. People who are into themselves only see a reflection of themselves everywhere. There's no empathy. The eating of maror is saying we're going to empathize with someone else's pain. Just like our ancestors were in pain, we want to not feel the exact pain, but try to project and try to sense. Today there's a concept they say called mirror neurons. You've heard of mirror neurons? Mirror neurons, they say, is a certain empathetic connection we have. The classic example is, God forbid, if you look at somebody about to close a door and they're not noticing that the door is going to close on their finger, you see like you just cringed. Right? You cringe. Here's the person, the door is about to close on their fingers, and you're not there. It's not going to hurt you, but you still cringe. It's called mirror neurons because we mirror other people's experience. So when we see something, we relate to it. And it's actually a beautiful concept. It means that we have the capacity to empathize. Not just empathize doesn't just mean mercy. Empathize means you actually feel another person's pain. So at the Haggadah, at the Seder, that's part of what we need to do. And this is also why we tell the story. We tell the story about a nation, our own ancestors. So it's true, we're not there anymore. We didn't go through the Holocaust. But someone that's insensitive to other people's pain, rest assured that they'll be trapped in their own pain. So empathy allows you to free yourself from yourself and allow to experience another. So that's really what maror is about. It's a lot deeper than just that it's bitter. It's actually empathy. That's what it is. It's feeling another person's pain. That's maror. There we go. Mirror, right? Mirror neurons. Mirror neurons, mirror neurons. Excellent. You want to trademark that? Okay. Mirror neurons. So now we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Step 9. Comes step 10. Kairach is the sandwich. Kairach means to bind together. So binding together is a form of harmony. We take the matzah, we take the mirror, and like Hillel did, we all put it in together, one big sandwich. So we take the humility of matzah, we take the empathy of mirror, and we make a sandwich out of it. And we actually ingest it. So it's like ingesting humility and empathy. I know this sounds a little weird, but I just want testing how that would sound. I don't think I'll be use that again. But the point is you're internalizing it. Let's put it, not ingesting. You're internalizing it. There we go. Then comes Shulchan Aruch. I always love, when I do Seders, I always love this stage because I finally can say, time for the grub. Yeah, Shulchan Aruch, which begins usually with eating a little egg. At this point, I'll just tell you my own quirk. Please don't share it with others, even though I'm broadcasting this for the whole world. But since I'm a little kid, you wait till the Shulchan Aruch. And I grew up in a home where the food was quite good. Passover food was very, very delicious. But because the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch is with an egg, you eat an egg, I became obsessed with eggs. So often in my house, people say, "Where'd all the eggs go?" They didn't realize that I could consume quite a few eggs. I don't do that anymore. I used to do it. Now, this is not part of the custom. This is just a little humor I wanted to throw in here. Okay, so let's get back to serious business. Shulchan Aruch, interestingly here, is usually you think, okay, the Seder is over, now we eat. No, the meal itself is part of the emancipation. Why? Because you could think that there's like almost a duality here, like, okay, there's the spiritual stuff we talked about, the psychological, and now we eat. No. In Judaism, there's full integration. Even a meal, even a good meal, with all its delicious menu and all that, is also part of your going out of your Mitzrayim, your limitations. Because you don't want to just escape to spiritual exercises and meditations. You want to say, I want to be able to go into a meal, and that meal is also part of my journey. And then we'll do the last 5 quickly. I'll do the last 5. Tzofen, well, this is last 5. Shulchan Aruch, the meal. After the meal, they bench, they take the blessing after the meal. Tzofen literally means concealed and secret. Because if you want to put it in psychological terms, the first 10, 11 steps is dealing with the conscious freedom. The last 4 steps deal with the superconscious, the unconscious. So tzofen literally means the secret, the hidden. What was hidden? Remember the middle matzah that was broken in step number 4? You eat that matzah, and that is called revealing the secrets, because it was hidden. That piece of matzah was hidden, and now you reveal it. You know what? My mistake. Then comes benching. Then the blessing, because tzofen is the end of the meal. It's like the dessert. Then comes the blessing, which is step number 13. Then Hallel is saying praise. Hallel comes from the word to illuminate. And finally, Nirtza means is that it's the 15th step is not even a step. It just means it was all accepted favorably. It's like when you do the first 14 steps, a certain blessing descends and emerges. Some things you can do directly and some things emerge as a result of your actions. So the 15th step is that emergence. So, my friends, I think I did a quick summary, but some type of a summary with insights that are most importantly focused on, again, the personalization of it. How you can actually use the Seder to be a tool and a method to experience something a little different than when you entered. And obviously, the more you focus on it, the more you invest, the more the return. And how it'll turn out when you're hosting or you're a guest at a table, there's nothing wrong with a little spontaneity, and we don't always know what's going to... But part of the adventure is not knowing what's going to happen, right? Not having it all planned out. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to be a guest at the table, there's nothing wrong with sharing some of these thoughts. If you're going to host, you definitely can use hopefully this material. And again, I repeat that there's a lot of stuff on meaningfullife.com. If you search, you can print out that are really good tools that can help make the Seder into something more meaningful. So with that, I want to bid everyone a very, they say, kosher and freilich and Pesach, a very sanctified and liberating and joyous Passover. Joy is a key word here. The great Arizal, the great mystic of the 16th century, Rabbi Isaac Luria, emphasizes that the Haggadah should be said loudly and with a song, meaning demonstrating that you're doing this with like a march, a journey that you journey with in a celebrating way, not in a sour, depressing, and too solemn, but with a certain upbeat, free spirit. So I want to wish everybody here that they really have a true liberating journey this coming Friday night. And then Saturday night we repeat it again. So you have a second chance, or elevate a second opportunity to do it even in a greater way. And maybe next Wednesday we're not going to have a class because of Passover. I'll be away. And when we resume 2 weeks from now, we can maybe compare notes. And you can share with me how things went. I would really love to hear how your Seders went. But I guarantee you that you have to feel very blessed, because if you can come to a table and really share some ideas and thoughts and feelings that can really empower people, you really make a difference. And I really think that I always always emphasize that I believe that revolutions happen from the grassroots. It's not going to happen from the top down. It's when people like ourselves will go to our little respective Seder tables. And it doesn't matter how much you know. It's really what you say that's heartfelt. Even if you know one thing and you can share it in a good, sincere and heartfelt way, you can change a life. If we all took that attitude that we can be proactive and that we are initiating, we're not just observant Jews observing others, but rather we are proactive, we are initiating, we are pioneering. That's what leaders do. So if you take that attitude, that itself, by the way, is extremely empowering to help you get beyond your own mitzrayims and limits. And that is feeling that you can initiate. You don't have to always be the one that's responding. Too many people tell me, I don't know anything, what can I say, I'm waiting. No. Everybody knows something. And the thing that you know may be what others need to hear. And there's a fascinating mission in the ethics of the fathers that says, who is the wise person? Halayman b'kol adam, the person who learns something from everybody. Who is the wise person? The one that learns something from everybody. That teaches you two things: that everybody has something to teach and everybody has something to learn. So there's no one that's the wisest person. He knows everything. There's nothing more to learn. That is antithetical to the concept of knowledge. A wise person that says, I know it all, you can rest assured is not very wise. Wisdom, by definition, means it's always growing, it's always inquisitive, curious. It's like climbing a mountain. And you go, you see the horizon, and you know if you climb a little higher, you'll see a wider horizon. And there's no end to this journey. And on the other hand, everyone has something to teach. From every person, he learns something. Everyone has something to teach. So you say, what about fools? You can learn a lot from fools too. They may not know. They may not be able to learn, but you can learn from a fool too. Because remember, talking about a wise person can learn from everyone. Fools don't learn from everyone, but a wise person learns something from every person. To the point there are Hasidic masters who even tell us lessons we learn from thieves. There's 7 lessons they teach us what we learn from thieves. Just to give one example, a thief, if you don't succeed the first time, you try again, for example. Persistence. And many other lessons. Something can be learned from everybody. So that teaches us that everybody has something to share. So there's also another very interesting, fascinating law in Judaism that says the mitzvah, the obligation to give charity is upon everybody. Even a pauper. Obviously relative, but a pauper also has to give charity. So the question is asked, one second, a pauper doesn't have anything. They need charity. Why are they giving charity? Because it's the dignity of a human being. I go back to the dignity of asking questions, just like you have a right to ask questions. Everybody has something to give. It may be a penny, maybe advice, maybe time, But everyone has something to give. There's no such thing as a human being on earth that doesn't have something to give. So yes, some of us may need, but we also have what to give. So may you give of your own unique spirit, because you have something to contribute to this world that no one but you can contribute. Everyone has their verse, their song, and as I often quote Oliver Wendell Holmes in his sad classic poem called The Voiceless. Alas, he says, to those that die with their song still inside them. Passover is a time where we demonstrate that we will not die with our song still inside us. Everyone has their unique song, and it's the time to free it, to free yourself from that. As Michelangelo said, when they asked him how does he sculpt these beautiful angels in the marble, he says, I see them trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. So maybe we can use the Seder as that type of analogy, that the Seder has helped to carve, not to discover something new. It's there already. It's to uncover. It's not to create something new, rather. It's to uncover that which is there, but sometimes trapped in marble, in concrete, or other substances. So may your angels be freed. May you help other angels be free. May we sing our song and be not voiceless, but express our voices and enrich and empower everyone else we sit with at this Seder. Everyone have a very happy and kosher Passover. We'll see each other in 2 weeks. Remember that we're here for you, Meaningful Life Center. We are partners in crime, good crime that is, and allies. Any way we could help somebody, if somebody's looking to have a Seder somewhere and they don't have where to go, if you contact our office, we'll try to help, depending on your location, wherever it may be in the world. And as well as I said, again, invite you to look at the resources. We have plenty of Passover resources that can help enrich the experience, every person at their own particular level. And with that, I bid you all a good night and a good day, wherever you are in the world, and a very blessed holiday. Thank you very much.